Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for braving the traffic and making it to our event. This is, of course, the Tech into Policy Driving Inclusion in India, which we're doing with Women in Tech India and the LSC Research and Education Foundation India. I am Ankit Modi on behalf of the LSC Alumni Association of Mumbai, Western India. I want to first, have Abhilash from the Research Foundation introduce the foundation, and then Prachi from Women in Tech India.
Thank you, Ankit. I hope you're all able to hear in the back. Thank you. The LSC Research and Education Foundation India is the arm of the LSC in India. We basically are working on three aspects. One is to be able to help raise scholarships for underprivileged students who will be able to go and study at the LSC. We've been a little successful. We're already raising some funds to be able to send at least one student starting the next academic year. The second is we will be working a lot on research with various institutes and departments of the LSC in India, on India and the region as a whole. And the third bit is to basically work on the education space, not in terms of teaching as such, but to be able to work on the policy development and policy design space with various governments across the country. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Abhilash. All right, so I'm going to quickly read out an introduction, if you don't mind. So good evening, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be in a room full of LSC alums. And tonight it feels even more special as a regional director of Western India to introduce you to Women in Tech. Before I do, a quick and a big thank you to the LSC Alumni Association of Mumbai and Western India, the LSC Research and Education Foundation India, our stellar panel, our moderator, our partners, and of course all of you for making it here tonight. So what is Women in Tech? We are a global social enterprise headquartered in France, working to close the gender gap and empower women through technology. Our mission is to impact 5 million women and girls in STEAM. When I say STEAM, I mean science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths by 2030 through 4 key pillars, which is education, business, digital inclusion, and advocacy. Today we have more than 200,000 members across the globe, spanning 60 chapters across 6 regions, all that come together every year for a Women in Tech Global Summit. This year in particular is very special. Our global summit will be held in Osaka, Japan, as a part of the World Expo 2025 in April under the theme Designing Future Society for Our Lives. Women in Tech India is shaping its delegation for this landmark event, which includes an opportunity to showcase at the India Pavilion and be part of the official signing at the Osaka Protocol. And while our India chapter is still young, we've launched on the March 8th, 2024 at the French Embassy in Delhi. We are gaining momentum across 4 regions through Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, and Guwahati. I'm going to quickly just continue to say that we can always connect offline, but tonight I just want to quickly thank my volunteers who are present over here, Palak as well as Samara. And then let's start off with the panel discussion, shall we? All right. Introducing Sonia, our moderator for this evening. Sonia is the founder of Studio Jigsaw, a strategy and innovation consultancy. Her practice bridges brand, systems thinking, digital transformation, and storycraft to help brands and businesses invent and reinvent. Sonia began her career at the political risk consultancy Eurasia Group in London, was a business journalist for Wall Street Journal in India, and spent a decade in advertising at a Grey Group as a brand strategist. She has a master's degree from the London School of Economics in International History and has a certificate in design thinking from Stanford University. Over to you, Sonia.
Thanks, Prachi and Ankit. Coming now to our theme for this evening, which is tech and policy driving inclusion in India. So India has witnessed transformative changes in leveraging technology to bridge gaps in public service delivery and outreach. Aadhaar, the biometric identification system, serves as the backbone of a large-scale diversified public digital infrastructure. This has revolutionized everything from financial inclusion to welfare distribution and many, many different sectors. Yet this phenomenal growth also comes with newer, more daunting challenges. We have privacy and data protection concerns on the one hand, which must be balanced with inclusivity and access on the other. So our questions that we'll be debating this evening is the greatest happiness for the greatest number achievable with the policy and technology tools available to the government? And is the current digital framework robust enough to address not just the needs of today, but tomorrow as well? So joining us to debate these issues this evening are Divya Pinge, a social sector professional with a background in commercial banking. Divya has worked at Aditya Birla Finance Limited, Axis Bank, and Yes Bank for over a decade before transitioning to the development sector, where she worked at Civis, a community-driven non-profit platform that fosters effective dialogue between governments and citizens on draft laws and policies. So following this, she joined the field of impact investments, leading research initiatives at the Impact Investors Council. She holds a BE degree in IT and an MBA in finance from Mumbai University. Her area of interest lies at the intersection of finance, commercial returns, and social impact. So welcome, Divya. Our next panelist is Neha Avasti. Neha is Senior Manager Mobility at C40 Cities, where she delivers the strategically important zero emissions freight and area programs in India. Prior to this, she worked at the Niti Aayog, the Government of India's premier policy think tank in Delhi, where she spearheaded the Aspirational Cities program to improve governance and service delivery in UP. She also designed the Niti Aayog City Regions as Growth Hubs missions, which promotes sustainable urbanization. And prior to that, she was at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, where she helped shape the Master Plan for Delhi 2041. She's a Chevening Scholar. She holds a Master's in Public Policy from the LSE, a Master's in Urban Planning from the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi, and also a Bachelor of Architecture from the NIT Raipur. So welcome, Neha. Our next panelist is Nikita Quatra, who's a principal at Artha Global. She leads research on DPI with a focus on its economic and developmental impacts. Her primary interest lies in analyzing government policies and private sector initiatives that drive economic prosperity. At Artha Global, Nikita has led diverse projects on state capacity, in impact investing, digital infrastructure, and social protection. Her interdisciplinary policy research aims to understand how countries achieve inclusive growth. Prior to this, she was a data journalist at Mint and as a senior correspondent at Cogensis Information, where she's tracked official statistics, macroeconomic indicators, and reported on the Indian economy. She holds a master's degree in economics from the Gokhale Institute of Politics in Pune. And lastly, Abhilash Puljal is a development economist and cross-border strategy advisor. With over 2 decades of experience, he advises public and private sector organizations, multilateral institutions, and industry bodies on establishing sustainable ventures, crafting business strategies, and navigating policy and regulatory matters. His expertise spans very diverse sectors from agriculture to renewable energy to healthcare, ICT, and education. Currently, he's a value chain expert at the UN World Food Programme in rural Assam. He's also a director at the Culp Foundation, which develops blockchain-based DPI in Africa and Asia. And he directs the LSE Research and Education Foundation in India. So welcome, everybody. So given that our theme this evening is so broad and it's a vast and complex topic, we've broken down the debate into 3 segments with a very strong focus on inclusion. So we'll be discussing the impact of the India Stack on India's digital transformation. We'll then move into the regulatory framework and how we might balance innovation with responsibility. And lastly, how we might bridge the gap with this tech-driven structural change that technology seems to be creating. So we hope that the panel will debate these issues and give us a fresh perspective and insight, and hopefully bring us to actionable solutions. So that brings us to our first segment, which is the impact of the India Stack on India's digital transformation. As everybody knows, I just want to set a bit of context. The DPI, known as the India Stack, has been a game changer for India with the Aadhaar, which is the unique digital ID. We have the UPI, we have ULI now coming in. We have DigiLocker and eKYC forming the infrastructure layer upon which numerous public services have been built. I'd like to start by asking Abhilash and Divya for their opening remarks on the impact the India Stack has had on public service delivery, financial inclusion, and direct benefits transfer, starting with Abhilash.
Thank you, Sonia. DPI actually is the digital public infrastructure is something that's totally changed the way we all live our lives today. We all know how it works. We know how the whole world has changed when, or rather India has changed when the Aadhaar was introduced as UAPI, and also when the UPI was brought in, the Unified Payment Infrastructure. And also there are many aspects of it, like you rightly mentioned, including DigiYatra. For those of us who travel, we've seen how easy it has become to use DigiYatra. And it has helped not just in urban settings, but also in rural settings. I work a lot in rural parts of India, and I've seen how this has actually helped in payment gateways. We are one of the very few countries in the world where most of our population is linked to banks. I think it was a very good initiative that was taken by the government, where most Indians actually are connected to bank accounts for various reasons. One, of course, is for their payments through UPI, but also for getting the rations that they get and the direct payments that they receive from the government. So it has been very successful. But one thing that I also wanted to bring into this discussion is how India has influenced this whole DPI stack for a global perspective. I work in a small country in West Africa called the Gambia, and they were very excited to see what India was able to present to a population of 1.4 billion people. We've been able to entrench into rural parts of India with the digital stack that we have. Yes, there are challenges, I'm not taking that away, but in general, we've been able to penetrate into different parts of the country, especially in the rural areas. Now, that inspiration that we have been able to show has been expanding into other parts of Africa and in Asia. So in G20 that India was leading last year, India actually put forward the whole idea of being able to bring the digital stack not just to us in India, but being able to give it to the rest of the world as well. And it just so happened that I was sitting with one of the diplomats from the High Commissioner of the Gambia, and talking about the different aspects of the digital stack that we have. And they basically said that lots of these pain points that they always come across, one of the main pain points was tax leakage. And a digital stack can actually help with tax leakage. A digital stack, parts of the digital stack were also being able to help women being able to get access to the various services that the government is being able to provide to the citizen. And government to citizen services is becoming very important, which we've been seeing for many years. We've been seeing with the government of Andhra Pradesh talking about it under Chandrababu Naidu in 2004, 2005, but it was not at the scale at which we were able to implement it across the country. So this whole thing has actually gone overseas. It's been affecting and helping countries. India has been helping, and another interesting aspect that has come with DPI is the private sector getting into it as well. There are companies across the world which are able to bring these digital infrastructures to people in their countries. So just to give you a context that DPI in India, as the digital stack as we call it, there are many aspects to the digital stack. The one aspect of it that also came about was tokenization, which is something new that a lot of people haven't spoken about. So that is something that the private sector is working on, trying to bring it in. So there are many aspects to it, and I'm happy to discuss those aspects and introduce this.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much. So, like Abhilash rightly said, what has happened with the digital stack is just the scale at which citizens in the country are being catered to, and financial inclusion has been on topmost of the list with UPI, ULI coming in. Apart from the scale, what I've been observing, based on the role that I've played as researching different startups and funds which are getting into this space, is a level of customization and specialization that's happening even in the space of financial inclusion. What used to be traditional banking was about one size fits all. You have a bank, you have those certain loan products, you have certain asset and liability products, and everybody caters to that, irrespective of who it is you're catering to. Today, the research that I've conducted recently shows there have been startups which have come in, which have been scaling up. It's not just a young startup; they've been scaling up with customized loan products specifically for gig workers. There is another solution which has come up with financial services for smallholder farmers. We as a country have around 80 to 90% of agriculture hosted with smallholders, not with large holders. So when you are having financial services which are not catering to the major part of an agrarian economy, there's a gap there. Which now with the financial stack, the digital stack coming in, a lot of, whether you are kind of superimposing your solution on the stack or developing something yourself, the awareness or the understanding of what can technology do to cater to different aspects of the population has become clear. There are different kinds of, there are neo-banking which has come up. You don't have to necessarily go to a branch to have an account. So just the democratization of credit, the access to a specialized loan product suited to what you need, and the ability to be able to repay that loan in a manner which is created with a lot of awareness. There are no loan sharks in the space now. That whole aspect can be curtailed. I'm not saying we fully solve the issue yet, but this is something which I see as a huge impact, and if managed well, and if given the right kind of I believe technology is always a lever. It's always a means to an end. So if given the right kind of support on ground and the digital stack being used for it, could actually enable financial inclusion in spaces where you would have otherwise absolutely have had no access to credit.
Right. So that's on the one hand where it's had a direct improvement in terms of financial inclusion and direct benefits transfers. But another thing that the India Stack has also enabled is entities of all kinds having access to data through data exchanges to build innovative applications in various sectors. Yes, payments, healthcare, education, logistics, mobility, even agriculture. So I'd like to invite Nikita and Neha now to talk about the impact of the India Stack and the impact on innovation.
Thanks, Sonia. So, thanks Abhilash and Divya for doing the difficult task of setting the context for what DPI and India Stack is. But in the literature, in policy spaces, DPI's definition itself has been an evolving debate and discussion. So, you're right, it started off as India Stack, which is essentially 3 layers, which is identity, the payments layer, the data exchanges. The definition, even if we look at it from an artifacts lens of what infrastructure, DPI infrastructure is, that's been expanding. So there's a consent layer with the account aggregators, DEPA, etc. There is the trust layer, eKYC. How does all that infrastructure come together to create solutions? Why I said the artifact way of understanding is that there is another definitional normative approach to understanding what DPI is, which is it's basically understood as an approach. So any technology which is interoperable, any technology which is open source, has a DPI approach to it. So it's expanded in a sense that the innovation that Aadhaar and UPI have driven are fairly well known. But even in sectoral DPIs, that's slightly lesser known stories. But a lot of these open source sort of infrastructures have created solutions that didn't exist earlier. So a very well known example is Diksha in education, which basically takes learning to remote and marginalized areas. And in healthcare, how it's enabled better EHR by digitization of medical records, and that's where a lot of the inclusion story lies. What is common to a lot of these this infrastructure is that it's basically gotten a lot of different data systems which were sitting in silos to speak to each other. So at the essence of it, all DPI is a data exchange, whether it's identity data or payments data as seen in Aadhaar and UPI. At the end of it, it's solving for an asymmetric information problem. So where data gaps are missing, and who can have access to this data. It's no longer logged in proprietorship. It's being made available to the private sector and other players. So the story really of innovation lies in creating that ecosystem. So, as we've seen, creating that ecosystem is not a straightforward story. So it requires balancing regulation with innovation, which can be tricky. And I suppose India has done a fairly good job with playing that balance. For instance, RBI's regulatory sandboxes, which are giving startups, new entrepreneurs an opportunity to, in a regulatory-free environment, create new solutions, greenfield technologies and innovation. Thinking about regulatory frameworks in a way where private companies, payment aggregators, payment gateways can be folded into the regulatory infrastructure rather than sidelining it. And we've seen examples of how this balance can go wrong. So Kenya is an example of how PSPs have been over-regulated. So whether it's through licensing, biometric verification requirements, and then when you get that balance wrong is where you stifle a bit of innovation and the growth story that is associated with DPI. So I guess in a sense the takeaway is that with this open innovation, which is almost become sort of synonymous with the DPI story, it's very important that regulation is also flexible, it's adaptable, and it's aligned with the innovation opportunities.
Thank you, Women in Tech, for having us here and discussing this important topic and pretty much the future of delivering public service. And that's where I would like to just add to what the other panelist has already spoken about. So when the India Stack came, and gradually when we started building on Aadhaar as the keystone of this entire infrastructure, it was very interesting, and this I'm reflecting from the work that I've done at Niti Aayog. So we had this, open source information available for pretty much everyone to pick up and customize it, tailor it to the need. What we interestingly found was the way the states were using to deliver the social sector schemes. And one such example that I would like to give is the Haryana and as well as Karnataka has also done is the family ID. So they basically picked all the open source APIs. They link the Aadhaar with the ration card data, with the income tax return data, along with their mobile numbers, and also that they can get access to the current address. And it has led to, within few months of time, they could identify more than 15 lakh people who were not eligible to get access to the social benefit schemes. They could drop out them with documents from the system, and in addition to that, they could identify 13 lakh additional people who were eligible but they were missing from the documentation through these APIs. Like, and this was done without doing any survey on ground, without reaching out to public, and that is the strength of data. And when departments start speaking to each other, similar thing Karnataka is doing through the Kutumb ID. It's on the similar platform, but I would say that Haryana has like taken it really forward. Now they are trying to actually make the income tax return data also linked to the family ID, so that they can also track like people who are residing outside of the state. They can track that also, and just to ensure that the benefits are reaching to the right people. So I would like, the reason for highlighting this is this really makes a change when it comes to inclusion, because sometimes it's very difficult to reach out to everyone. The outreach can be limited. Again, we are more and more relying on digital outreach, which has, again, internet accessibility, time, duration, everything, the platform. It again, it creates certain new silos. Um, but the interesting thing is that we've been able to use it in the social space. Cities have been using data and this mass integration at a mass scale, uh, particularly with the Urban Development Ministry. When we were trying to build the urban digital stack, one of the important focus was, can we look into startups and reach out to them and see, like, these are our service delivery pain points. Can someone come up with a solution? So, like, simply collecting a waste collection fee was a difficult thing. Property tax collection, again, a very very important topic. We don't talk about it enough, because that's where the funds to the municipal body is coming, and they're not able to collect it. And the digital infrastructure is actually helping link the property with the current development, with the kind of bylaws there are, so they can track where are the where there is certain exploitation that is happening, unauthorized development that is happening. So all of this is possible only when we have access to data. And yes, it is helping in social inclusion. Also, it is helping in creating good governance models. And I think both of these are very important when we are trying to develop and be in the top leaders when it comes to sound economic development. So that is what I would like to say, that this is beyond only data and technology. It has more to do with how we deliver, and how do we even take it up to the next step, where like Abhilash already said, that we to a certain extent we are already global leaders. But in terms of challenges also, for example, I come from an urban development background. The kind of traffic that we see, and the kind of slums and unauthorized development that we have, a lot of it has to be backed by data and live information that can feed in and inform the decisions that we are taking every day.
Thanks, Neha. You talked a bit about the challenges, the non-technical challenges when it comes to outreach and service delivery. I want to, delve deeper into that, because despite all these advancements and interlinking of data and crossing silos, India's rural areas still lag behind urban areas in terms of digital literacy, internet access, and access to infrastructure. So, how do you build inclusion by design in a way that incorporates these non-technical and cultural barriers, whether it's language, whether it's literacy, whether it's gender, economic accessibility? This is a question for the panel, but maybe, given that you brought it up, you raised it, maybe you can start with you.
I think it's a very important point, and this is where we are struggling as we are urbanizing. And why I'm bringing urban again and again is, we are already 35% urban, soon reaching 50%. So it's largely cities that we'll be talking about. And with cities, I mean, is a very different kind of economy that is working. It will remain agrarian to a large extent, but there'll be development mushrooming all across the country. And therefore, the need to expand this infrastructure before we reach that level of economic disaggregation across the country becomes very important. When we, from the service point of view, are looking into infrastructure development, earlier it was all only about road, water, sanitation. When it comes to exclusion of rural areas, I would largely say that it is there, but somewhere the rural priorities also need to change. Because now we still see that there is a lot of integration when it comes to urban areas, but the rural system is still very much on paper and it's working offline. There are efforts, there are incentives now, there are finance commission has linked, but certain components of your funds will be accessible only if you digitize. So that is happening, but again, it's largely state driven. It will take some time to reach panchayat level and other local government level. But one example which I always like to include when it comes to what can actually be learned from the rural areas is the way ASHA workers have picked up technology, and NRHM is performing better than NUHM, which is very unlikely. We keep saying that rural areas, they don't have the right health infrastructure, but when you see certain parameters, when you see that these frameworks are well adhered in the rural areas, and tech has played an important role there. Simple tool that when ministry started teaching ASHA workers on feeding the data directly on tabs, you get more and better data inputs from rural areas compared to urban areas. So I think that is the power that our villages and remote places hold. But we'll have to do a lot of capacity building and hand holding when it comes to actually using them for our benefit.
Anyone else would like to talk about inclusion by design?
Please.
Go ahead.
Please.
When you talk about inclusion by design, I mean, I'll just start out by saying that I agree with Neha, like the earlier point that you were making when you started off talking about innovation. There is inclusion just doesn't end at data or technology system or design. There is a key layer of intermediaries in between who need to a lot of time translate some of these systems to underserved, marginalized communities, especially when certain public service delivery is to be catered to these sections, and social benefit programs are intended towards these beneficiaries. Having said that, and since your question is about inclusion by design, I think there are 2-3 things there that become very important. I think you already in your question mentioned about language. So especially with a lot of AI technologies sort of coming in as well. One thing that in general with DPI, with AI, we've been able to do well is just customize a lot of at an interface level, translate a lot of services to a local language to reach some of the marginalized communities. The other thing that comes when we talk about inclusion by design is there's an UNDP digital transformation framework for inclusion, which talks about things like a single point of data entry. What that means is that, again, going back to the importance of data sharing, that it can be a cognitive overload for people who are not digitally very literate to again and again submit a lot of documentation, which is required for different departments, because the way government departments work in India is extremely siloed. Even for different social protection programs, one scheme doesn't speak to another scheme, so it's just that load of resubmitting documentation again and again, which can be very disincentivizing for certain sections. So there, stuff like a single point of data entry, when once that's inputted into the system, then the system's speaking to each other. So that's where inclusion can come by design. Another example of how inclusion needs to be thought through at the level of conception of technology and design, even before we get to implementation and access and bridging that gap through intermediaries. I mean, I'll give the example of Aadhaar, and it was much later that, we heard the first story of at a gender level, the third gender card, Aadhaar card was issued. Earlier it was more binary. So I think that's some of the stories where how you think about like where do you build inclusion even at a conceptual level. So.
Thank you. Thank you. We were talking about inclusion by design, but in India also it happens not by design, and that's the great thing about technology. When 2016, when the Notebandi happened, a lot of actually let's go to 2020. When we had the COVID that happened, people didn't ever expect that their children will ever have to study remotely. So technology, especially thanks to what we have with technology that's brought in, even in rural India, I have seen in places in Bihar and the likes where it was normal, and this is a very good example for inclusion. It was normally the head of the family, which is the male, who would have a proper phone. He would have a phone which was, it had apps in it. Otherwise, there was a dumb phone for the lady of the house. It was that Nokia old phone that the lady of the house would have, and then the male would have this fancy thing where he would watch YouTube videos, etc. But when it so happened that COVID came in, children had to be given these phones, so then the women also started getting these phones, and the children also started getting. So that is not by design, but it did happen. So these are things, it's by default, exactly. So technology has that kind of attraction. While we are looking at technology, we should not forget that businesses also have been benefited by this a lot. I'll give you an example of what I did in Bihar. So there was, and you were very right when everything is in silos. Every department is always in silos. So we always saw that if somebody wanted to do business, it's a small businessman. This is not, the Aditya Birla Group coming to Bihar to do business. It is an average businessman wanting to do business, running from pillar to post, trying to get their license, trying to get their GST done, trying to get all kinds of things done. You have to give the same paperwork here, same paperwork there. Now, what the government of Bihar did was they came with a single window scheme. And the policy came out saying that if the government doesn't issue you all your licenses within 30 days, and this was in the policy, this was in the Act, the Industrial Development Act, if you don't do it, it is deemed approved in 30 days. And I think that's where policy comes in, and that's where it becomes very important how we bring in these policies to enable technology to be able to make it easy for all of us to make our lives easy actually. And it does for individuals, like you all rightly mentioned, but also is helping businesses, and that's what also we need to. This thing is coming off.
If I may just add to what everybody has just said, I think that inclusion of design, and here I'll borrow from my experience with civils, I believe is the role of public consultations. Since we are speaking of policy, bringing in any policy, whether it has a tech angle or it doesn't, or any program for that matter, without capturing the lived experiences of those whom it's eventually going to impact. We can have a lot of academic discussions, we can have a lot of discussions with the ones at the higher rungs of the system, but eventually for it to be really efficient and have its efficacy in place would be only when the ones who are directly using that at the end of the day have their expectations captured into the policy. We have something called as a pre-legislative consultation policy which came up in India I think more than a decade ago. It's not a mandate yet, which is why every law, every policy doesn't come to everybody for consultation. But it's something which is expected of every law, every policy, every department. If that starts coming in, especially now because technology is evolving at the speed that it is. So if we start making these discussions by having a lot of technocrats coming in, a lot of academic discussions coming in, but not capturing the relevance of whom is going to impact, somewhere that inclusion or inclusivity in design, I believe, might get missed. And in relation to this, I believe is the importance of capturing the right metrics to measure the efficacy of the program or the policy. For example, financial access and financial literacy are two different things. One may have access to UPI, so many millions of people would be on the app. I'm not sure how much has that really translated, what percentage of household income has it resulted in increase in, what kind of personal income has it resulted in increase in, how many children are now going to school which earlier weren't. So if we do not have the right metrics at the design level, at the implementation or the monitoring level, somewhere there may be a lacuna. So I believe all of this is just tied in, what you spoke about ecosystems and about having holistic thinking into all of this. It's all interlinked.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us to our next segment, where we talk about the regulatory framework and how we balance innovation with responsibility. This was something that we brought in a bit earlier, but we'll delve into a bit now. So with Aadhaar becoming so integrated into every aspect of our lives, from birth to death, there are concerns about data security, misuse and fraud. So is the system foolproof? Are there lacunas? There are numerous reports that suggest that it isn't as robust as we think. So what are the emerging risks and how do we mitigate them? Nikita.
Yeah, so I think the story around data leaks with Aadhaar, especially around 2018 when the massive data leak where the data of about over 1 billion people got compromised. Those are well documented and raised, rightly so, alarms about the robustness of the Aadhaar system. But even in 2018, part of a rather important part of this story is that it wasn't really about the data architecture and design of the Aadhaar system itself, but how the data was stored, managed and secured at various touch points in the ecosystem. So even in 2018, it was a lot of state-linked utility companies and village-level operators where the data handling and the management sort of goes wrong. So a lot of neglect in that data handling, and how do you build a culture of responsible data management has been the key gap, which has led to data getting compromised, leaks happening. So I think how do you solve for issues around lack of encryption, poor access controls at these local levels, and better and how do you solve for inadequate auditing? I think that's where from a policy or regulation lens you plug a gap and then start creating, like I said, a better culture of data management. But how that translates into on ground and in reality is going to be a big challenge, because that's where the state capacity gaps start coming in. That's where the massive scale at which data is available even at local levels becomes a very big challenge. But I mean that's what really needs to be solved for or addressed.
Okay. So then that brings us to the concern about law. I mean, how is the law that governs the collection, usage, storage, and sharing of personal information? Does it plug in these risks? And that's on the one hand, but the data also gives the state sweeping powers that in fact aid surveillance. So what are your views on the latest DPTP rules, and that's dominating every policy debate right now? And are there enough ethical safeguards, enough regulatory safeguards to ensure that the data is safe?
There are two levels of safeguards that we need to have for our data. One is, of course, the regulatory level, where we do have the DPDP that came up in 2023, and then the rules which just came out recently. That's one aspect of it. I think we should have had that much before. Better late than never, we have it. GDPR is something that we modeled it around. But these things cannot, this in a country like India, this cannot be one size fits all. And the point that you have raised about how this actually, when you start giving data to state level and then municipal level and then even the lower level, even at panchayat levels at some point, that's where the leakages happen. There are times when you've seen Aadhaar with a dog photo in it and all kinds of wrong information coming into it. These things actually have to be controlled again at both levels. There has to be a policy for the data that is being given under the DPDP. There are challenges in that. There are lots of riders that are there in the DPDP where the government has the upper hand to be able to control some of the data, what they want to do and what they don't want to do. So from a technology point of view, that's where we need to bring in, and I think DPI is being done in some places on blockchain and in other places it's not. Again, it has to be a regulated blockchain, it can't be an open blockchain. So there are technologies that are out there, there are technologies that can be used. So the two ways that needs to be done, one of course from a regulatory standpoint, which I think India has taken a very important step. Again, there are challenges in it, like I said, but the other aspect of it where we need to look at is from a technology standpoint, and that I think is something that we have not done. We do talk about a DPI very globally, but nobody is talking about being able to contain this in a very foolproof way. When I speak to people in Africa or even in the Middle East, when they talk about their data, they're very particular. They're very keen in these smaller countries, saying that so far we are keeping all our data on the Amazon servers, on the cloud. We do not want that. We want our own data servers where we want to keep it on. That brings in technology. That brings in new technologies like blockchain. It's not new, but technologies like blockchain which can actually run your DPI on it, and then you can know where it is going wrong and how you can curtail it.
Anybody like to add to that?
Just one more point. I think what is also important is the documentation and re-verification fatigue that all of us are going through. And I think that is an important leakage point, because all the scams are now like, you need to do a re-KYC. And we still are, somewhere, even people like us are also, getting trapped to such scams. And this is more prevalent in even the rural areas where such awareness might not be there. So somewhere if we can find a solution to, again and again, if you have my data from one department, why do I need to give it to 10 different departments? Just going back to the Haryana example that I was giving earlier, the state had to deliver 700, 800 plus social sector schemes, and that's when they started thinking about, can family be my point of intervention? And then that's when the department started speaking to each other. So, but that has happened in one state. Everywhere else, and again, the data there also is compromised to a large extent. I remember speaking to the senior officials there where they said, they face challenges like, what do we do with, we generally register the male as the head of the family. What do we do? How do we deal with a female head? How do we deal with eventually if the family is separated, with whom the kids will stay? So all of this will come, and eventually you'll have to either legally answer it, see how we are going to, the more and more we are integrating, there will be different challenges coming our way. And I would say that this is just the beginning of the new issues that we might see later on, where the data might get compromised, misused, and even lead to disinformation.
Coming back to the question that you raised about DPDP and the previous conversation that we had around data leakages, I think one thing that has come out as a criticism of these rules is the vast discretion and given to the government sector. So a lot of this data ends up being compromised, whether it's at a local but at a public sector level. And having that kind of omission and discretion given to the government, has in some sense rightly come into question. So.
this also brings us to another aspect of balancing innovation with responsibility, is because now with AI coming in, there are also concerns about data biases or discriminatory outcomes that may disproportionately exclude women or marginalized groups from access to public services or benefits or opportunities, particularly when they are used in public administration. So how do we So how are we seeing these biases actually emerge? Do you all have any instances that you all can speak to? And should there even be a regulatory body overseeing the ethical use of AI in government? Especially when we know that increasingly data will be compromised. So how do we solve that?
So, I mean, I'll start with the global context around this. So, I think MIT had done had a report around, how a campus system which speaks about criminal justice and repeat offenders actually and which is based on AI that works on facial recognition, has been throwing up these data biases, which sort of reinforce some of the societal stereotypes.
Yeah.
So how black, and women, were showing up as a high risk as repeat offenders. And that sort of speaks to, in some sense, the maturity of where some of these systems are. So a lot of that, in general, because of how quickly it's developing, at the same time, how raw some of these technologies are, poses a very tricky question about regulation of AI. So this was an example which was outside of India, and when a lot of that gets recontextualized to India, some of these would be different sort of use cases that we will see emerging. For some of the sectors, especially medicine and legal, like we spoke about criminal justice, some of these consequences can be very dire. And but for other sectors, there may be more subtle examples of how AI or algorithmic decision making can go wrong. For example, you spoke about social benefits. So if biases sort of creep into that decision making, where let's say payments get reimbursed or certain schemes get reimbursed to disbursed to, some sectors and beneficiaries, then that's going to have challenges of its own. But having said that, how some of those use cases emerge as we borrow a lot of this AI technology from outside, and because there is, that borrowing happening, a lot of the same prejudices and challenges will get replicated here, but we will see our own set of challenges given the unique context in which some of this will get applied in India. But I think at the outset it would have to be a lot of frameworks and guidelines driven approach rather than severe penalties, because you don't know how that's going to shape up. It's a bit of a gradual scaffolding approach that regulation of AI will have to take, because I think right now people who are behind a lot of these generative AI technologies also do not understand how some of it is going to work. So one is that the gradual approach, but the other is then you don't know what you don't know, but creating as much transparency and accountability into how some of this is getting developed and being tested, and the early results of this. I think the transparency element of it is going to be crucial as well.
So I can just actually we'll just speed up a little bit. This brings us to the last segment, which is how we might bridge the gap, because India has, we've all talked about how India has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the tech era. Yet there's also a fear that we might actually witness a huge amount of socio-economic upheaval amongst various groups if this transition is not managed well. Because on the one hand, we're seeing that the promise of absorption of the rural worker class into the manufacturing and service sectors is being challenged. We're also seeing the new economy sectors themselves undergoing their own technology revolution and shedding millions of jobs. So, where will jobs come from? How will we, employ much of the workforce? How will the workforce transition from, agriculture to service, and transition to the new digital economy? These are questions that are still unanswered. Will there be a backlash? And where would these conflicts start emerging? What are we seeing on ground? Who would like to?
I think in terms of just kind of aligning with what you just spoke about AI biases, I think a lot of conflicts will start coming when there are new technologies for which we do not have any kind of historical evidence on what to base it on. We speak of deep tech. We are speaking of a lot of space tech has now come in. I was just reading yesterday about some flying taxis, which it's going to be now coming up soon. A lot of this is going to be modeled. I mean, the data which is going to be modeled over here, we do not really have any historical evidence of how it's going to shape up. Plus, there are very different cultural, social nuances across the country. For example, if you start using this in one part of India, it may not necessarily hold true in terms of efficiency in another part of India. There are these kind of gaps which are going to come in, and the one way to kind of ensure we are on track is to just have a lot of continual third-party monitoring happening. Because otherwise regulation and everything is fine. It's more of a guideline, but everybody's figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
So there isn't really one hard-coded way of deciding this is the way. One would have to be constantly checking oneself from an objective place to ensure it's true to what you set out to do, and then course correct. So I believe with technology and with everything new that's coming in, that may be one way to go about it.
Okay, but this question is broader in terms of how are we going to employ the vast majority of people who might be left behind in this digital era. So
See, there is no solution to it as of now, but at least, so right now I'm working in the EV freight segment, and the more and more we are speaking to people on ground, whether it's a feasible thing to adopt, not, what are their, fear points when it comes to EV adoption. And one big segment comes is this is largely, so around 30% of our GDP revolves around freight segment and logistics. 13 to 14%, that's the current status, which is huge compared to any other country. And therefore, it is also a huge employer. And if we are talking about any technology path break, there will be people throughout the life cycle of the vehicle that will be affected. So there is a pre-life, there is the on-road life of the vehicle, and post-life of the vehicle. Having said that, the more and more we are upgrading the technology and moving away from ICE vehicles, the more and more electronics, tech, AI, all of this is becoming important. We are already talking about driverless cars. So we are even thinking beyond, losing a lot of jobs. But what is parallelly happening, and this I see a lot of action from the private sector. Here I can speak from the truck manufacturers for that matter. So they have already started picking up people from the existing workshops, which are along the highways, or they've started training the drivers because they know that they need a lot of on-ground understanding. But these are the people who have the right skill, but they can be upskilled. So basically trying to say that there is a huge scope for upskilling, and it cannot be driven only from a government perspective. There will be a lot, because every business is coming up with something new and their own needs and demand is very different. So I would say that here, going forward, the skilling part, I feel that the private sector has to take a lead frogging and be on the leadership role, and maybe government can just back them, just support them wherever, whatever is needed. Because this is a very fast changing ecosystem, and anything that you set up, say try and set up through an ITI, that you will skill few people on certain new technology, it will take 10 years, and by that time the technology will be redundant. So we don't have that kind of time benefit anymore when we're talking about technology. And I see that the transition can happen only when we have very proactive private sector, and there are already signs. I just spoke about EV, there are other segments also, people, Blinkit and all, like all the gig economy. They're just simply 1-2 hour training session and then you're good to go, operate the app and register yourself. So I think that is the kind of, more that such kind of work will be required, and it's already happening to certain extent in a very ad hoc manner as of now, but I think that's where we are all headed.
So, I mean, the question is, are we creating a two-tier kind of job market where you have the gig workers, you have cleaners, delivery executive, drivers, waiters on one side, and you have highly paid, skilled labor on the other? And is that going to be a big challenge? And the second question is, I mean, governments can't front this. Governments can't lead skill development. So what are the skills that we're going to need, and what kinds of jobs, and what role can the private sector play is something that we need to answer for. So who would like to answer these questions?
No, I totally agree with you that the private sector has to take a lead, and it has been taking a lead.
Yeah.
Even if you take our the UPI, it was Paytm. Now, of course, they're not doing too well, but Paytm was the one who actually led the way when all of this happened. So private sector certainly has to take the lead. But to answer the crux of this question, where you're saying what will happen with AI coming in, will people lose jobs? Will there be this two-level, people doing manual labor? See, when internet came in, this was exactly what everybody said. Oh, people are going to lose jobs. We were all going to be, redundant. But everybody had to learn. There is a curve that one has to go on to climb. And I think this also, and I think governments also realize this, private sector also realizes this, and it has to be done in tandem, like you rightly said, Neha. That when we do it in tandem and we are able to bring that skill sets for us to be able to work with AI. I was talking to a lawyer the other day, and then said, I asked him, one of the managing partners, I said, don't you think that with AI coming in, you will have less staff that you need to employ? He said, no, it is not that I'm going to employ less staff. I'm going to employ that staff that can actually use my AI. It will not be that, I'm going to put it away and I'm going to use. Who's going to use it? I'm not going to sit. I'm the managing partner. I'm going to sit and use it. I'm going to make my work more efficient, and that's what AI is going to bring. This is so far what we know. Now, how AI is going to change, we also don't know. Like you said, it's a very fast evolving animal in itself. So we still have to see. There's a lot of learning that we need from AI. Also is not perfect. I mean, I've tried using it so many times, and there are only 4 things that I feel. There's so many apps that are coming out these days in AI. I'm sure all of you have these reels that come up saying, if you want to write a paper, use this AI. If you want to make a, whatever, you're using it. But there are like 4 or 5 basic ones that all of them are using. So right now there is no regulation to control it. So the other question you were asking about, should there be some kind of solution, regulatory, aspect that needs to be? But of course it has to, and it will come at some point. Who's going to lead it is the question. So far we are seeing the US leading it, and now China certainly coming in, so maybe we don't know who. But whoever leads it will again be the leader. When the internet revolution came in, those countries that were able to do it are the ones who are doing it. So whoever is going to lead it is going to take the lead on that.
So, thank you, panelists, for a fantastic and really interesting conversation. I'd like to open it up to audience questions. Who would like to go first? There's no mic, just speak it out, yeah. And let me know who you'd like to address it to as well.
I didn't really think about it like that. And it might be a broader topic than this, but I guess my question was more around the definition of inclusion. It seems that we've all kind of interpreted it as the inclusion of marginalized rural populations in the whole process of our data stack. But I was wondering like what it would take to kind of expand that definition of inclusion to something bigger. And I'm coming from the perspective of I was involved in rolling out Canada's self-sovereign digital identity national trust framework. And you're aware of self-sovereign identity, it's essentially a blockchain-based approach where individuals are actually who control their own data and who has access to it. So we're switching the power structure from governments kind of managing your data and owning it versus you owning it. And from my perspective, I think me owning my own data and then deciding where it goes is like probably the highest form of inclusion I can think of. Now, of course, how that translates out to the rural population is a whole other scenario, but I was just curious maybe if you had your thoughts around how and what it would take for India to kind of consider an approach where the individual is managing their own data and then and their own identity documents and passing it on, and if that has even been considered as part of the whole digital stack that was being created.
Wow, what a fabulous question. Who'd like to answer?
Go ahead.
I think that's an interesting question. One, I mean, just the definition of inclusion, it comes from a lot of internalized context where we are habitual of thinking about inclusion as, the last mile. But I think that the question that you raised towards the end speaks more to a consent-based framework around digital systems and digital services. And I think a lot of that is, that thinking is already underway. So initially, when I was talking about DPI and innovation, I think we mentioned account aggregators, DEPA framework, and DEPA framework is basically account aggregators and DEPA work together to create that layer of consent where when you're talking about digital payments or digital lending, it's basically making that payments data available to those stakeholders, lenders, etc., and solving for an asymmetric problem in the credit market. But it's happening in a way where you're making it consent-based. So there are a lot of I have to approve, like, before my data goes, am I okay sharing that data? So it is participatory, it is consent-based in that, in its nature, and there's a layer of data intermediaries and fiduciaries who also, and that's where I think inclusion, as sort of we've spoken about it and understood, comes in, where there is a problem of digital literacy in the Indian context. So what do I know that, what am I approving, and how do I know where this data ends up traveling, which is where that even with this consent architecture, the layer of intermediaries then becomes very critical.
Especially the definition of inclusion.
Yeah, I think to just broadly answer that question, I think with every solution or every framework, one would have to define what inclusion means. To my opinion, it can't be one broad definition, but very contextualized to that particular problem that we are trying to solve for. Be it in the case of the technology, digital literacy or financial inclusion or digital inclusion. With every framework and that's why I think the point which I was already talking about in terms of metrics would come in, because that would ensure if you're really remaining true to what you set out to be inclusive for. To answer the second part of your question, I believe while yes, ultimately the ownership of the data or the management should be with the person whose data it belongs to. I think in India, for that stage to come, before that inclusion would have to be a lot of education and awareness. Even today, even not just the last mile, I'm myself not very sure what exactly I'm supposed to give my consent for. So while no way with the account aggregators or the intermediaries should be having like a free license over your data, but at the same time, I'm not sure if we are there yet where every citizen is really aware enough to know how to manage their data.
If I understand your question, I'm going to go to the second part of your question. I'm looking at it from what it was from Web 1.0, Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. And Web 1.0, like all of us know, it was basically a website where there was information, we would read it and consume it. Web 2.0 is when we were interacting with the other using apps, like when Facebook came, we were interacting with each other. Web 3.0 is stepping back and all the data in Web 3.0 was actually with large corporations in the world. But what you're talking about is to be able to have the data with me so that I'm able to give the data that I want to give. To a certain extent, in the digital public infrastructure that we have, there are some aspects of it actually is where you use Web 3.0, where your data is with you and you only give that. For example, DigiYatra. DigiYatra will not, when you are entering the airport, the guy does not need, the machine does not need you to give your address and your everything else. It only gives you that aspect that it is you who are entering into the airport to be able to catch a flight. So that aspect of it is already embedded in some technologies, but I totally agree with you. Is it where do we draw that line to give the information that I do? Like for example, if an 18-year-old wants to go to a pub and get a drink, you have to take out an ID and give it to them where you have to give an ID which has got your address, it's got your mobile number, it's got everything on it. But if there can be a solution where you just give them the information that they want, is that you're 18 years and over. So that I think that it's still in the process, but some of them are actually being done. DigiYatra is an example. When you go, but again, when you go with a policeman, you give the license. That fellow can take you for a ride if you can actually make a copy of it. He's got it. You can go open an account. That's why these challenges are happening. So to answer your question, yes, we are there to a certain extent, but we still need to work on it a lot more. For that, we need policies, and for that, we need also to technology and policies to be able to work together on it.
Next question.
I would just like to add to that. What you gave the example of DigiYatra. So DigiYatra came up with this, how Spotify wrapped is. So it came up with DigiYatra wrap, and it said that we are not retaining any data. So then they were trying to say that we are not misusing the data and we are not retaining any.
There is a challenge to that also. DigiYatra is owned by a private company. Now that's where these challenges come in. So we need to really understand, that's why policy becomes very important. That's why we need regulations in place where these things can be in the private space. I'm not saying no, and a lot of things even in Canada is in the private space when you look at blockchain and all of that. And across the world, it's the private players do, but that has to have some kind of a ring fence. Like Paytm, you can't just go and do whatever you want. They had a ring fence, and they were not able to keep up to it, so that's the reason why they were not able to be successful. So those ring fences have to be built, and I think that better do it earlier than later. And I think that's where we may be lacking a bit actually.
Can I just add one thing? So, just not answering, I don't have a solution, but just a thought, like we are talking a lot about our IDs and information that we think is government is providing or are related to our identity, but knowingly, unknowingly, we are passing on a lot of information about ourselves to different platforms that we are so used to now. Like for example, Blinkit knows our consumption pattern. We use all the app-based healthcare things. So, and if you read their terms and conditions, there will be some line somewhere saying that they will be sharing the data with the relevant party. So what if next year when I'm going to pay my insurance premium and they say no, you are diabetic or whatever. So I don't know, like my pattern, my consumption, all my other parameters which we generally don't associate them with our identity are also being shared with the businesses. With generally it's like a consumer pattern, but then it's a lot of personal information about yourself, and there is nothing as of now to regulate it. All we do is you have to spell out all the terms and conditions, and honestly none of us really read it before clicking the block box right there. So the problem, I would say this, we are just trying to touch the tip of the iceberg. It's way more deeper than what we really can see and feel right now. Just wanting to bring that up.
Anybody else? Yeah, just say it out loud.
Yeah, hi. So I am also an architect, and I am just transitioning from the non-tech background to tech background, and I am extremely fascinated by the fact that India as a country is developing infrastructure which is digitally and physically both, right? So I want to understand more about the digital side of it, which is us developing UPI is one, which is one sector of it is payments, but there are also other sectors which can be like developed in similar manners, which is one is energy, right? So we have a unified energy interface coming up. So in that way, what other sectors do you think or feel are strong in the upcoming years as we go? And the impact it has on the youth of today, irrespective of them being a tech background or not tech background.
Hi, I'll just borrow from a little research that we had done last year in terms of the kind of innovations that have come up. I think one area where what you're saying might fit in is the whole SME tech space. With a lot, like MSMEs are being given the kind of thrust they are, and we are seeing a lot of solutions coming in which are embedding different requirements of a very small business, for which earlier they may have had to go to multiple vendors. Like, their basic requirement is they need money at affordable rates of interest. They need access to markets in a transparent manner, where with small businesses there's a lot of exploitation that happens. There have been solutions which kind of bring the tech and the non-tech angle both. For example, Kirana stores are getting onboarded onto a digital platform. They're also getting discoverability of vendors who can sell products to them. They're on the same platform, they're also getting access to finance. Like the platform is giving them access to multiple other lenders who could, one of them potentially give them money. So it's basically one stack which is addressing different business requirements of the MSME space. Similar to this, there is telemedicine, the whole health tech area. But I feel in terms of growth and scale, the whole MSME space is one where there is employability, skill development, all of those criteria kind of getting met. A lot of these digital areas happening. Also with the risk like what Neha just mentioned about so much data being out there, and not all of these small businesses are aware or educated enough to understand the implication of it. So I see this growth story happening, but also a strong risk area also associated with it.
The transparency in terms of data is quite missing. You actually missed the consent and the education. Yeah.
There was also an idea stack, I'm forgetting the full name, which came in a few, 3 years ago, which was basically a digital stack to onboard all farmers onto it, solving similar needs. Now imagine having all the data of all the farmers in the country onto one platform and a private operator managing this. From their perspective, they are getting access to fertilizers, pesticides, seeds, everything that they need for their farming. But they also do not come from a background which even tells them as to what are they getting into. So with this growth story of the tech platform, there is also a risk story which is very strongly emerging. I'm not sure what is the solution.
Answers or solutions. Anyone else? Yeah.
I wanted to make a comment that I think we would be alright.
Neha.
Yeah, sorry. You made a comment on the information shared with me. I think data privacy is a very cultural aspect, right? The top 70 million people have very Western ideas of privacy. Right? The rest of all of us want to give the data to government so that they can run schemes, various schemes. Right? So, Amazon package sort of sits at your watchman table, right? For a long time, anybody can just take a snap of it. Okay, which has your phone number and address and everything, right? Or personally identifiable information. So, these are very new things, and of course, technology is so fast developing that policy will not be able to catch up. So it has to keep to this catch up rule. Second comment I want to make is that blockchain is not a silver bullet. Okay, in fact, has anybody read their data from a blockchain? It has very complicated mathematics, and to access that data, you you have to be a very specialist IT person. So, that we will put in our data on blockchain and it becomes secure, then it's inaccessible. Right? We want to also access that data. Right? And third thing is what happens in a data center. Apart from IT people, there is nobody trying. We may have hold seminars, webinars, all symposiums, but what happens in a data center? How data lives? And to be fair, somebody made a comment about Aadhaar. Aadhaar system, there are few thousand attempts every day from China to hack into that system. And it has survived. Right? So as Nikita said that it is the intelligence of various state actors that has led to leakage happen. Nobody's acknowledged that there is a leakage. Though some French activists have been talked about. So that's all I want.
Thank you.
I have another question. So, in addition to what you said, so the geopolitical tensions in terms of tech and AI, which is US has ChatGPT, China has DeepSeek, and I believe India is in the works of having something of their own. So, in terms of us using ChatGPT in general, right? All of the data goes to the US. So how does that work out? In terms of geopolitical usage of them knowing what we do and what research and what goes in our country. Like how does that work? Will you guide us on that?
Interesting question. It just reminded me of a conference that we had held where, and this was a discussion with Nandan Nilekani, and he made a very interesting comment that India should not even get into the game of competing with who creates the AI platform because it's heavy investment. Let the AI, builders even outside build that. If we can leverage that, if we can bring in that technology once it's made available, and on top of that create innovative solutions and get entrepreneurs to build solutions. I think that should be the way to go for India. So I'm just regurgitating what I had heard from that conversation and found interesting.
I'd like to. Oh, question. No. Go ahead. No. Finish your question. Go ahead.
I'm a pro engineer. My specialization may be known as hard here in this group over here. Critical infrastructure resilient expertise.
Sorry, can you?
Critical infrastructure resilient expertise.
Okay.
And it's interesting to know that it's offline as well as online, the critical infrastructure. There's a very interesting topic, the digital transformation, digital platform, electricity and digital platform. So there are certain bits which is important for the governance point of view. The word you use, the governance. So India is going in a phase for coming 20 years where we need certain infrastructure should be safe. Any disaster can come up like COVID, Nodebandi. Nodebandi is also a disaster because no one was aware. It was just initial and it spread across the country. So all the sectors has to get trained for that themselves. Similarly, COVID, even the Ukraine-Russia war, we have gone through lots of trouble. So are we involved in certain prospects where we have to safeguard our critical infrastructure from the digital platform perspective? I'm not able to put all the words together, but can you, because that is a part of the management. I'm a tech guy, I will make it. So, मेरा काम हो गया. I will be rule based has to be there. There should be a policy where certain infrastructure should be kept as a standard level, 1, 2, 3, and critical one, which has to be safeguarded very well. A resilience expertise. If those structures break down, there should be something. As she said, every day some Aadhaar, there are hundreds of attacks are happening. What should be the next level of as a resilience? Do we have any kind of a policies?
Can I take that? Do you have something you want to ask, please?
No, so just what I've understood, what you're trying to ask is, do we even treat the digital infrastructure as a critical infrastructure, and do we have plans to protect it or build resilience as we build, right?
For the future coming 20
Yeah,
years.
yeah. So while I was talking earlier, I did mention that earlier from the infrastructure perspective, we used to only talk about critical infrastructure like road, railways, transport largely, and then water, sanitation, and health infrastructure, education infrastructure. Very well, this has entered that segment that digital infrastructure is critical, and it's basically, it has been qualified as a basic need that the government needs to deliver. Now, anything that the government needs to deliver has to function even in crisis. So there is no policy protecting the digital infrastructure, but there is enough, qualifying it as a basic infrastructure gives it that center stage when it comes to protecting it and ensuring that it works even during crisis. If I remember correctly, when the Ukraine war started and the entire internet connectivity was disrupted, and the satellite based, the star thing came in. So that's when, there was talk, at least internally, that this is something, which India needs to start thinking about, because we have a very sensitive border, and so therefore, like, I'm just wanting to say that there is no policy trying to protect it, but there is enough awareness around it that this is a very crucial infrastructure when it comes to connectivity, when it comes to data protection, and it needs to be protected in all sorts of crises, be it war, be it pandemic, or any natural disaster. Because again, Odisha's example I can take. So few years back when the cyclone hit, and they were able to reach out to every person in the state well in time that they could evacuate the coast. It happened not because the government was very active, not because they had internet connectivity, because of the heavy rain, everything was shut down. But they could do it because their entire system was designed for an SMS based service which will work despite having no internet or access. So that is how you build resilience when it comes to when you're designing your entire governance around a digital infrastructure. So that is one example.
My question is towards the SMS is delivered to the individuals.
To the individuals.
I'm talking about critical. The place from where the SMS are generated.
Yeah.
There has to be some critical.
There is a critical mission of Government of India, organization, which even usually you can protect, like National Stock Exchange, Mumbai Stock Exchange, HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, State Bank, all these banks, electricity boards, everything is looked upon and they are monitored from a criticality point of view. So there is already a central government is already thinking.
So I think that's wraps up the questions. One last one. Quick question. Okay.
So thinking that AI is going to take over a lot of jobs. I'm not thinking that there's a big approach here, and everyone seems to be in the race to become the leader, or to compete it, or to combat it, or some wider trying to upskill. But are there jobs that are perhaps not needing to compete with this race? Like, if everyone is just going to become an upskiller or like a user of AI, what are the others? What are the other jobs that one can do to have a sustainable life without being part of this happiness?
If I could just
Outside of that.
be an artist.
Really? That's all there is?
ChatGPT can make it.
No, what a bank can do. I think one
Can I answer?
Sure.
So I think
This is typical LSE style.
as AI booms, right, the handicrafts and the luxury market is going to boom like crazy. Because even when, I can't think of an example, but it's mass it's going to mass produce certain things, right? So it's going to make the odd jobs easier for you. So then you can maybe focus more on the luxuries of the life, which are handcrafted, more personalized elements, which are not possible via AI. But that's right. So, open to the
I think the sports sector is still going to be there. You still have to play. You still have to, you can't have AI playing for you, So the sports, there are a few sectors, I think sports being one of them. And then even in the agriculture sector, you still need manpower. I mean, you can bring in AI to maybe get your, climatic conditions, and you can do all of that. But you really will need, again, physical labor on the ground. Maybe you want to bring in, missionaries to do it, which is already happening. Mechanization is already happening. But you still need that human being to be able to run that program or to make it happen. So I don't think it is going to die out loud, but one thing that just struck me was sports. At the end of the day, we all need to play.
Okay. Thank you all for a really interesting audience interaction. I'd now like to hand it over to Ankit for his closing remarks.
Well, thank you, everyone. Firstly, this wonderful panel that we had, such an amazing interactive discussion. I think it was Mukesh Ambani who said that data is the new oil, and I think we've learned so many new things today from all of them about this wonderful and very interesting and at times scary intersection of the kind of technology that we're getting into, as well as the kind of policy decisions that we're making and going to make. So I really want to thank our panel, Neha, Divya, Nikita, and Abhilash, and of course Sonia for moderating, and definitely the audience, LSE Research and Education Foundation India, as well as Women in Tech India. We have some small, and of course the club, which has been very kind to host us here at this wonderful venue. So I want to also give a few small gifts from our sponsor, an alum who has founded a brand called Soraya Cosmetics brand, SOHRAI. This is name is Khanak Gupta, and some small gifts to the panelists from them. And then lastly, I'll hand it over to the club to speak about what they do in their facilities. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. So I'll just hand over the gifts. Nikita. Divya.
Thank you.
Abhilash.
Lady first.
You're bringing
You shouldn't be gender biased.
So again, thank you again, everyone. I request all of you to just stand up, maybe with the boxes, and
The boxes?
yeah. And